This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and there has been an important struggle of working people and the people of Korea against an attempted effort to have martial law, to have a coup, and to institute a dictatorship in Korea. And there was mass opposition to it among the people and the working class. And joining us this evening is Yoon Suk Yeol. He's with March to Socialism, and he's been active in fighting for democracy and for the workers' movement in Korea. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe you can talk about the recent developments of martial law, what happened, and the response of the people and workers of Korea to this institution of martial law.
You may know the martial law by Yoon declared martial law on December 3rd, the midnight, and within 2 hours, the National Assembly passed a resolution to demand the dissolution of martial law. So the martial law lasted only 6 hours, but it really overturned or really shattered the Korean society, the whole Korean society, because martial law was the very instrument of military dictatorship, which governed the Korean society with the fast methods from 1961 to 1987, especially in 1980, when the former military dictator Park was killed, and then the new military dictator Chun Doo-hwan tried to conquer the power. He used martial law in May 1980. The people against the martial law, and they organized very heroic struggles, but finally they were killed. They were massacred. The Korean society had to be suffered from very, very severe fascist measures at the time. So for my generation or older generation, we cannot forget the experience of that time. And the newer generation studied the history in school. The democratization in 1987 has been considered very, very important turning point in Korean history. And the military dictatorship would not be able to be recovered, but suddenly the martial law, fascism, military dictatorship came to South Korea. So even after the dissolution of martial law, most people have had very big concern or fear about the coup or something like that. So you need to understand the severity of the martial law and its impact on Korean society. So after the declaration of martial law, thousands of people went to the National Assembly, and they helped the National Assembly members go into the office. And then the president accepted the martial law. After the president accepted the dissolution of martial law, started to remove the president from his position, because if he remained in the position, you cannot have a peaceful night. 3 a.m. on December 4th, it means before the dissolution of the KCTU declared indefinite general strike. But actually, the general strike was not so strongly organized, but it was a little bit rhetoric. But on December 5th and 6th, around 100,000 workers participated in the general strike. And it made a big role to build a huge, great demonstration on December 7th. So It was newer. It was the size of demonstration on December 7th was nearer that of demonstration in 2016. Since then, every night there were many demonstrations all over the country. And then finally, on December 14th, the National Assembly passed the resolution of impeachment of Yoon.
And the orders of Yoon in the martial law were to arrest political leaders of the Democratic Party and the ruling party, some members. Also, what has been the role of Yoon as far as repression of the unions? I know that there are construction union leaders who are in jail, and there's kind of repression by the Yoon government against workers and democratic rights of workers.
Before the martial law, some part of workers were already under something like martial law. For example, as you mentioned, construction workers cannot have the right to unionize themselves because they were punished by their union activity itself. Hundreds of workers were arrested and prosecuted and now sentenced. So they are still jailed, prisoned. But in the recent martial law, the government announced that all kinds of rallies and strike cannot be allowed. So it means actually no unions, no strike be allowed. So the martial law would mean the destruction of workers' movement. Independent unions, democratic unions, and their activities, especially strikes. It is very obvious because in the dictatorship period in South Korea, actually there was no independent unions and strikes that are considered legally.
And the United States is very worried about Yoon. They had supported Yoon and they liked what he was doing as far as militarization of Korea and encirclement of China. What do people in Korea think about militarization and where the United States is going in relationship to China and militarizing Korea and Japan?
Has tried to China, Russia, North Korean alliance, and the both parts have tried to intensify the crisis, military crisis around the Korean Peninsula and East Asia. If the war broken in and around the Korean Peninsula will be very different from the war in Ukraine, because now we have seen many destruction in the war in Ukraine, but militarization of Ukraine is very different from that of Korean Peninsula. In and around Korean Peninsula, tremendous of weapons, including nuclear weapons, are accumulated. So if a war happened in and around the Korean Peninsula, it will mean a total destruction of society. Within a week, if someone have the rational idea, it is impossible to think about or pursue the real war in and around the Korean Peninsula. But the policy of Yoon government and the Biden administration has pursued the intensification of the crisis, military crisis, and the opposite, China, Russia, and North Korea governments. Most Korean people really don't want to see another war. It means they don't want to die, to be killed by a war. According to many afterward facts about the recent coup of Yoon, he tried to establish the cause of self-coup. the martial law. For example, on October 13th, in the sky of Pyongyang, a drone was detected, and the Pyongyang government said that it was from South Korea, but the South Korean government denied, and they maintained the NCND policy. But recently, the drone was a part of the readiness of the Yoon government. This fact is publicized after the coup. So the Yoon government or Yoon itself tried to make a small war to make the martial law possible.
They fabricated an incident to
Yes,
justify the introduction of martial law, saying that they had been attacked by North Korea in a provocation.
There should be other investigations, and many things are still undiscovered. And the role of the United States is still ambiguous. Some people say that even though the agreement of main policy between the US and Biden administration, the Biden administration didn't want Yoon government to play. So Biden administration was worried about the outbreak of a third war. It means the war in Ukraine and Middle East war, and then East Asia war. So the Biden administration didn't agree with Yoon's plan about making a small war and martial law. Other people are saying that the Yoonseok coup might be supported by the Biden administration. So there are many different arguments, and I think we have to have some time to clarify the truth.
And there's a growing threat of tariff trade war between the United States. The Trump administration say they want to introduce tariffs not only against China, but Canada, Mexico, and Korea. How would that affect Korea? And also, Trump administration is saying that they want to increase money by Korea of their self-defense forces, of their military. Otherwise, the United States will pull out of Korea. They're threatening to pull out of Korea. What's your view about that?
Yeah, the expected policy of Trump, as you mentioned, about the tariff and more money for the U.S. Army. And they wanted the South Korean government to send some message to Trump to establish better relationships. But after the martial law of Yoon, all these stories are underwater. Yeah. You cannot have the room to talk about the relationship with Trump. The current situation is all occupied by the self-coup and afterward stories.
And there is a danger, as you know, in the United States. There was an attempted insurrection and coup in 2016 by Trump, and he is threatened to become a dictator on day one. And he may try to he wants to arrest Liz Cheney and other Democratic politicians. What are the lessons for the American workers and the working class in the United States about what's happened in Korea and your successful effort to stop the martial law ruling by Yoon?
Yeah, I think we cannot talk that we have finally blocked the attempts of Yoon, because the process is still ongoing, and the final result of the impeachment trial in the Constitutional Court is not obvious. But at least people in Korea was able to deprive the president of his power by the struggle of workers and people, the rising of workers and people. And I think it can be a basic method for or for the workers and people in all countries. Actually, the far-right forces in the South Korea is still very weaker than that of United States or Brazil, Argentina, because the economical situation in South Korea recently is better than the United States or Brazil or other countries. And so we don't have the social base for the far right like the US. But in South Korea, there have been some kind of political remnants of military dictatorship, and their generational bias to the very elder people has limited their social influence. But this self-coup of Yoon showed that the far-right ideology was in the mind of the president. So I think it shows that the power of far-right forces or the danger of the far-right forces is over our imagination. So I think only the power of working class, including the general strike of the working class, can we fight against and neutralize the far-right forces. So even in South Korea, we saw the weakness of the power of working class. We are trying to rebuild and reorganize the awareness of the urgent necessity of building the real general strike to fight against the far-right forces. And I think it should be international way of to fight against far-right forces.
The working class not prepared, and the union bureaucracy in the United States that don't want to talk about the danger of fascism, even though
Yes.
they're faced with a frontal attack, Project 2025, and mass deportations of immigrant workers. These are tactics that fascists have used. And it seems like in relationship to both Japan, Korea, and the United States, the political vacuum in both countries is that there's no working class party. There's no mass working class party in Korea and in the United States as well. And people are angry with the Democratic Party. Do you think that there's going to be a political development for a working class party that represents a program for working people in Korea?
At least in the organized workers, especially in the KCTU, there have been some workers' parties, and they are very small in the standard of the whole society, but in the standard of organized workers, some progressive parties have relatively stronger bases. So I think the situation is some different in this aspect. The situation is a little different between the US and South Korea. But anyway, the argument between bourgeois parties tend to blind the eyes of workers and people. Even establishing very ferocious far-right measurements, they have the appearance of attacking another parties or politicians in the cause of fighting against corruption or the established people. So the real sacrificer, who should be workers and people by the various kinds of establishing fascist measures or regimes. So I think we should make it clear that the attack of far-right forces of fascism is mainly to attack on the basic rights of workers and basic gains of rights of the workers. The workers should be the first one to fight against the fascist attacks. In the opposite side, such a fight can be a very important step for the huge development of workers' movement.
And of course, international solidarity is critical. There are many Korean parts companies, auto companies, Kia, Hyundai in the United States that fight the unions here. And there's a struggle of the UAW and workers here to organize at these plants. Should there be direct solidarity actions between workers in Korea and workers in the United States?
You mean ordinary times or at this time?
At this time, because I mean, workers are under threat in Korea,
Yeah.
workers are under threat in the United States.
I don't have any information about that at this time. Yeah.
But I mean, the workers in the United States face a fascist government, and
Yeah.
one of the struggles is going to be their fight to organize in the South, particularly, where South
Yeah.
Korean companies have built major auto plants, parts plants, and they're trying to unionize them. So it seems there needs to be more solidarity between Korean workers and U.S. workers together, fighting the same owners.
Yeah, if such solidarity actions be organized, it will be very important advance for workers' movement internationally. Yeah, but at this time, I don't have any information about that.
And so, what do you see the future? Will the Yoon be removed? And politically, what do you see the future as far as the development of the working class and the unions in Korea?
The possibility of removing Yoon from his position is higher than the opposite, but it's not obvious because this situation is very different from that of 2016 when the President Park was impeached. At the time, she was very neutralized, but at this time, Yoon declared that he would fight with his supporters to the end. The far-right forces already began to organize very fierce demonstrations in the streets. And their supporters were gathered again in the polls. So roughly around 75% of people are against Yoon government and self-co, and 25% support it. And there are many institutional peoples which can make the process of impeachment failed. So I think the possibility is about 2-1. Yeah, removing Yoon is 2, and the opposite is 1. So I think we cannot talk about easily the time after Yoon's removal. At this time, we have to fight. We have to organize the fight for the complete removal of Yoon, not with the real power, not just word. Yeah.
And lastly, what can U.S. workers do to support your struggle to get rid of Yoon and for the workers, the KCTU, the workers of Korea?
If the workers in the U.S. send their messages of solidarity, it'd be very helpful for Korean workers, Korean fighters in workers' movements. Yeah. And I think in the future, we will fight with U.S. workers when they fight against Trump.
We face the same fight.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, Yoonseok. Obviously, workers in the United States and workers in Korea face very similar struggles and need to unify and defend our democratic and worker rights. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.